What's happening, guys? I'm Curtis with Left Foot First. Today I'm going to show you guys how to flare your own brake lines at home. So it turns out flaring your own brake lines is turning into a bit of a dying art. So much so that I need some blank brake line, some unflared brake line to finish the rear brakes on my hot rod here, and I can't even find any. So I got a bit of time, so I figured I'd shoot an episode showing you guys how to do your own flares at home. Today we're going to be doing just the inverted flare, or the double flare, or the SAE flare. All means the same thing. There's basically two types of flares. There's an inverted flare and there's a bubble flare. In North America, 90% of the cars you're going to run across are going to have the inverted flare. European cars tend to use the bubble flare. They're both the exact same steps, the exact same process. They're both just as easy to do at home. There's just two different tools. So I have all the tools to do inverted flares. When I bought them, right next to them were the bubble flare tools. So I could have bought those instead and done bubble flares on the car, but I'm in Canada. So we're doing inverted flares today. I have two different types of flaring tools. So I'll show you guys those, and then we'll do some flares, and then we can talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each tool. So these are the two styles of kind of manual flare tools that you're probably going to see. This one, kind of this I don't know, bridge style flare tool. This is a really common style. Basically every toolbox has one of these. If you guys don't have one, you probably just haven't checked the bottom drawer of your toolbox in a really long time. There's probably one of these hiding down there. That's kind of the standard. It's been around for a really long time. A little bit more of a recent addition is these kind of single die, or I call them hammer styles because they got a little handle on them. It makes them look like a hammer. You don't actually use it like a hammer, it just looks like one. So this is a little bit more of a new thing. I haven't seen these around for very long, but these ones are pretty nice. They make a really nice flare. They are a little bit more limited though, because you can only do one size of flare, versus these come with 5 different flares typically, all the way up to a 1/2 inch, which would be massive. But you can do fuel lines or low pressure hydraulic lines with these, versus these ones are just a single size. You have to buy a different tool for every different line size you want to do. But those are the typical ones. These are cheap. These are about $30, like Canadian Tire, Napa. These ones are a little bit more expensive. I think this one was 86 bucks. I'll throw a link to where I got this guy down below, but you can just buy them off Amazon. So let's do some flares with them. I'll show you how they work. We'll start with the bridge style one, and we'll go from there. So as with anything, it's way easier to use these when you clamp them into a vise. You can use them handheld or like on the car itself, but I prefer to work in a vise if I can. So I got this guy clamped in. They come with these little arbors, these little dies kind of thing. They got a little pin in them, and that's what's actually gonna make the flare. So that fits into the end of your line like that, and then it's gonna squish down and make the flare. So the first thing we need to do is prep our line. So before we start flaring, we'll prep our line end here. I just cut this with a little rotary wheel tubing cutter. Works pretty good, makes a pretty square cut, but it has a taper on it. So just take a file, knock that taper back. So you want a fairly squared off edge, and then I use a countersink tool just to deburr the inside of that line. So we got a nice straight square cut there, ready to flare. And then we're gonna clamp this guy into this little clamshell guy in our 3/16 position, because it's a 3/16 line. Now it needs to have a stick up above the surface of the flaring tool. So you wanna, if your dies are like mine and they're just one thickness, you're gonna make the stick up one thickness high. Some of them have a step in them, so you'll actually be able to set the die upside down on this deck, put it up next to your line, and then push your line up to that step. Mine don't, mine are just a disc. So I'm just gonna make sure that the top of my line is level with the top of that disc. And then I'll clamp these down. You do want them clamped down fairly tight. So throw a wrench on them. When you buy one of these, some of them have wing nuts on here instead of, these are just 1/2 inch nuts. Some of them have wing nuts. Don't buy the ones with wing nuts. Those wing nuts tend to just break off. So they're not really worth anything. After that, I'm gonna throw a little bit of lubricant on the end of my line here. You can use like, honestly, you can just use a drop of brake fluid. It makes for a nicer flare. And then we're gonna actually stick that pin inside the brake line. So drop that over, put the pin over it. And we're gonna grab our bridge here. That goes over the top. There's a little indent in the top of these dies. There's a little divot in there. I don't know if you guys, oh yeah, you can see it there. There's a little divot in there. So the tip of this this bridge cone fits inside that little divot. And then you just stick a wrench on it, start cranking. So we're gonna go all the way down until that arbor, that die, hits the top of our clamshell here. So we're flush with that. Then we're gonna back it off. And we're gonna actually pull this die out. Of course it's stuck. So we'll have to use a little persuasion here to get it to pop out of there. There we go. So got it out. So that's the first flare of a double flare. So it's actually taken if you imagine these are the walls of the brake line, it's actually taken them and squished them like this. So now we need to do the double flare, which is gonna be taking the edges and squishing them like that. So to do that, we're just gonna take our bridge, which has a cone on the end of it. We're just gonna stick that right in the end of the flare. Grab a wrench. Crank her down a couple. Doesn't need much. And there we go. There's a double flare done. So there's our flare done. Not too bad. Don't worry, I'll get you guys in a little closer later. But the next step, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna take this guy out of the vise and I'm gonna put the other style in and we'll do a flare with that guy. So you'll see the hammer style flaring tool is actually just a handle screwed into the bottom of this little block. This is what actually does all the flaring. So I just mount this block in a vise and just take the handle off. Makes it a lot easier. So I'll mount that guy. Nice and tight. We'll do the same thing with our brake line. We'll square the ends. Make sure we got a nice surface there to flare. And then we'll deburr the inside with our countersink tool. We'll throw just a dab of dye lubricant on there. And then we'll pull out, there's two screws that come with it. So we'll stick this guy in the end here. there is a kind of a viewing window on the top and a line. So all you want to do is make sure that the tubing is past that line. You can stick it out as far as you want, it doesn't really matter at this point. And then you're just gonna snug these top two bolts up. Don't even put a wrench on them, just do them up finger tight. And then there's this, I don't know, length gauge, I guess, butting block. There's nothing on the end, it's just a flat end. And what this is gonna do is set our distance perfectly. So that screws in, oh, I got this in a little bit far. There we go. Hammer style. So you're gonna screw in the blanking plug, I guess, into the end here. And what it's doing is it's actually pushing the brake line out of the die a little bit to make sure that it's in the perfect spot. So we screwed that all the way in, it bottoms out. And then grab a 10mm wrench here and we'll tighten these guys up. Once again, these gotta be pretty tight because they're what's actually holding the brake line. So do those up. We'll pull out our blanking plug, and then this is the actual die bolt. Yes, I don't know if you guys are gonna be able to really see that. There you go. So this is the actual die. So it's got a flaring die on this end, and then the doubling die on this end. So what we'll do is we'll put in the flaring die. There's actually, it says right on it, it says op 1 right there. So operation 1, thread this guy in and put a wrench on her. This is what's actually doing the flaring. Screw them all the way in until it bottoms out. You don't have to do it up real tight, just until it bottoms out. Back it out. Flip it around to operation 2. Screw that in. And same thing. You don't have to do it tight. You just gotta bottom it all the way out. And there we go. We'll undo these top 2 bolts and our flare's done. And there's our flare. All right, and there is how you do a flare on your brake lines using both the hammer style and the bridge style flaring tools. So both of them work really easily. They're real simple to use. Clamp the line, well, clean the line, prep the line, clamp the line, and then it's 2 flaring operations to do the inverted flare. Now, pros and cons to each system. Pros for the hammer style. It uses a straight bore clamping block, so there's no teeth on the inside of this block, which is nice because it gives you a nice clean surface when you're done, versus the bridge style one has serrated teeth on the inside of the clamping block, so there's little serrations on the brake line when you're done. Not a huge deal. If you look up the flare specs for these, there's actually a call out that says that marks are acceptable on this section of line. Not a huge deal. I just like it when they don't have the marks on it. The other pro of the hammer style is because everything is held so rigidly in there, you end up with really nice square and straight flares, versus the bridge style one. I don't know if you guys are gonna be able to pick that up on camera, but it has a fairly aggressive slope to the flare itself. That's just a symptom of how these work. They're always gonna have an angle to the flare. I know somebody out there will be like, I've been doing flares for 30 years and I can get them straight and square. That's great. For the average guy who's watching this video trying to figure out how to flare brake lines at home, you're always gonna have a little bit of an angle on your flares. Not a huge deal, typically. Normally when you tighten it into your blocks or your calipers or whatever they're going into, there's enough deformation in these lines that they'll kind of straighten out and seal, and it won't be a big deal. But the hammer style is nice because it just gives you nice clean and square flares. Pros to the bridge style, obviously cost. Like I said, this is about 30 bucks and you can do 5 sizes of line. If I were to do the same thing with the hammer styles, I'd have to do 5 of these. I'd have to order 5 different ones, and at 80 bucks a pop, you know, you're 450 bucks just to get the same functionality as a $30 flare tool. So if I was gonna be doing all 5 of these different lines, I would absolutely be using this guy rather than the hammer block ones. But all of the brake lines on my car are 3/16, so this was a pretty good investment for me. The other big advantage to the bridge style that I think a lot of people overlook is grip length. So if you look at the hammer style one, it's where you can see it the best. So you can see this line right here. That's how far you have to insert your brake line before you start flaring. That's the little window that you look through to see if you're in far enough. So that's how far you have to go before you can start flaring. Normally not a big deal unless you have to put a flare near a bend. Now, when you stick that in, yeah, sure, I can make it all the way into that flaring line with this bent piece of line, except for before I start my flare, I gotta put a tube nut on. So now I have very little space here and definitely not enough to make it all the way to that flaring line. However, the bridge style one has a very short grip length, so you can do flares really close to bends. That really short grip length is also why it has to have serrations inside of it though, so you know, you win some, you lose some. But I always keep one of these around just in case I have to do a flare really close to a bend. The other thing we didn't talk about was tube nuts. Make sure you guys put your tube nuts on before you do your flare. If you guys forget, there's a really easy system to fix that, to get your tube nut on. You just cut your flare off with your little tubing cutter, insert your, or put on your tube nut and start from scratch. So that's how the flaring tools work, you guys. There is a third style that's like a lever action one, but it's way more expensive. I'd love to have one, but for the amount of flares that we're doing on the car, it just really isn't worth it. But those are the two that you're gonna find the most in what you guys are doing. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you liked what we did, like and subscribe. If you really like what we do and you want to support the channel, I'll throw a link below. We started a Patreon channel to get you guys a little bit more involved in what we're doing on the car. And Patreons get these videos a week earlier than YouTube. So hop on there if you're interested in what we're doing. There's some other benefits too, but we're building it out. So that's all I have for you guys this week. Hopefully I can get some brake line over the next week and finish up the rear brakes on the low cost. And then, yeah, we'll move on from there. So as always, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. I'm out of here.